Welcome to Breaking Banks.
Welcome back to Breaking Banks, it's great to have a regular guest that we've had on the show. In fact, he's probably been on the show, I don't know, probably 20 times. He's co-hosted the show with us, and he's got a brand new book out. He's also known as the Finanser, and Chris Skinner. Welcome back to Breaking Banks.
Great to join you, Brett. And you know, you and I have talked so much about everything that's going on in the future over the years, most of which I got right and you got almost right. Glad to be on the show.
Well, we could debate this in some detail. But of course, I think the point, I think directionally we're both correct. I will admit that my prediction that checks would be phased out in the UK and the US was probably a little ambitious. But at the same time, you will recall in Bank 2.0, I predicted that mobile wallets would overtake plastic, and everyone thought that was crazy.
It's all about
So
timing. A lot of
yeah.
these things are very obvious, like biometric recognition for payments. It
Yep.
was predicted, in the 1980s, but it took the smartphone to get there. And
Absolutely.
as we go forward, someone said to me the other day, "What's your prediction for the future of payments?" I said, "Well, you won't have a mobile or a wallet or a card or a cash. It's just going to be smiling and winking."
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly when we start thinking about smart glasses and the role that they will play in payments in the future, there are some good proxies for sort of thinking about how I call them super wallets, these AI-based bank accounts and wallets that do more than just manage your money, that, act as an agent on your behalf to manage your finances,
Have you brought
potentially
the
store
Apple Vision
healthcare
Pro?
data. I haven't as yet. I am thinking about it, but right
Because,
now,
but if you think about that, that's exactly what we're saying, which is, the augmented reality, virtual reality, we're moving into a stage where, the whole financial structure will be within a virtual world.
yes, it has to be cloud-based, right? So your bank account, if it is being operated by your artificial intelligence, your agent that is sending payments or, like for example, paying bills on your behalf or doing things like that, it's got to have access to the wallet. It's not going to be on your phone necessarily. There'll be an instance of it on your phone, but it's going to have to be in the cloud because it's going to have to integrate into payments rails and things like that. I think that's fairly obvious. And also, if you want to have secure payments in the future, you're also going to have to be on the cloud because of things like quantum computers and AI AI methodologies, in terms of doing smart contracts and so forth. All of that
But
is going to require the API hooks and
but,
all,
but then
all of
there's the
the
question of beyond cloud, which is when you decentralize everything, like Tim Berners-Lee's a vision of the
proposal. Yep.
decentralized internet future, that the cloud isn't a centralized structure. It's actually, my personalized structure of my own identity. And it's going to be really interesting where that concept leads to. But we're jumping ahead. I
No,
said
no.
I'd
Well,
let,
let's
yeah.
let's explore that. But first of all, tell us about the book you've got coming out, so we can sort of at least talk about that and frame the conversation around some of the research you've been doing recently in respect to this topic, actually.
Well, it built on those themes. The book's coming out in the summer, and it's called Intelligent Money When Money Thinks for You, so you don't have to think about money. And the original concept was starting with exactly what we started off with just now, which is the friction between centralized versus decentralized structures, whether it be the internet or government and or money and banks, because there's originally where I was coming from was the friction between cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies and stablecoins, because there's like a
Right.
whole discussion around that space. And then in the middle of that, ChatGPT came out with OpenAI, and then Gemini from Google, and all the other artificial intelligence systems and platforms. And I suddenly realized that if you have embedded, invisible, intelligent financial services and payments, what does that world look like? And that
Mm.
became the theme of the book. Um, and my result of that is basically that it's in the hands of the individual. It's nothing to do anymore with governments and the state, although the governments and state want it to be in their hands. It's to do with the individual controls how they live their lives using technology.
I think that's an admirable position, but when it comes to things like identity and medical data, for example, your genome, and so forth, there's got to be an element of some centralized verification of your information. I don't think you can have fully
But
self-sovereign
the question is
identity,
how
right?
that's done, because you and I know a lot of other people like Dave Birch and others who are in this space. So it's about what central verification data is required and how is it delivered. And if you can give a persona that's encrypted, that's partial data, not your full identity, for medical and government verifications, uh, does that do the job?
Good question. Let's talk about, let's jump straight into the future, and let's sort of look 10 years in the future and tell me how you expect this to work. Like, what does the infrastructure look like? um, where does this information sit? Who are the counterparties that are involved in identity or in terms of this? Like, for example, today when you go to a bank and you want to open a bank account, banks collect all of this identity information from you, and you go through the same process every single time, for a new banking relationship, which is a hassle. Now, there is account switching in the UK, but of course, if we take this sort of a more broader approach, you're going to have a range of government services that you have to access digitally, that you're going to need a digital identity for, things like healthcare, transportation, digital passports as an example. Um, so you are going to have some formality in the system for what is your identity, your biometrics and so forth. Even though you can sort of store that locally, there seems to be, but just talk us through how you think that would operate, in an average day, if you have to go to, a medical provider, or you're making a payment in a store. What does that look like in terms of that interaction?
I think embedded invisible finance is the way we're going. And that's almost there today when we look at wallets or biometric recognition of payments or services. And from a medical or financial view, um, you get to the point where you don't think about how that works. It just happens automatically. And then the question is, what are the parameters around that to alert you to what needs to happen? In fact, I said 20 years ago that I would spit on my bank and they'd recognize my DNA. Um, but equally, within that, they would alert my doctor to whether my DNA shows that I've got medical problems. You know, that's quite extreme. It's actually British humor. But when we're not far away from that situation, and the other thing through personal experience, but with cryptocurrencies, decentralized currencies, and banking per se, is that there has to be some control structure. And so even when we look at 10, 20, 100 years, there has to be a control structure. And the question is that control structure the network of the people or the state? And this is the big friction which I was referring to between cryptocurrencies and central bank fiat currencies, which is it controlled by the state or the people?
Well,
And
I mean, I think that there's an argument for retail currencies, which are controlled by the market or by people. But when you're doing cross-border trade, and you need international
Yeah, but
standards.
you just said cross-border. That's a last century term because the network doesn't recognize borders. The network that we have today of the internet and mobile is global. There are no borders.
No, I understand that, but from a trading perspective, there are trade
No,
agreements and other things
there
like
aren't.
that.
There are no borders.
Okay, all right, interesting. So you think, like geopolitically, how does this work when you have something like China's CBDC and they say, all right, if you want to trade with China, you've got to, you want to buy or sell goods to China, you've got to use a Chinese mobile wallet with a, E1 CBDC. How do you how do you avoid that type of
Well,
market maker response?
it depends what situation you're in, and the only borders that exist are physical borders. So it's like that cash in, cash out discussion around cryptocurrencies. If you cash out a cryptocurrency into a domestic account, then yes, there are borders because you can question where did that money come from, what are the sources, and how did you make that investment, and where's the tax? If you do everything digitally, then there are no borders. I had this argument and discussion again 20 years ago because a friend of mine was living his life in PayPal. These days, you can live your life in any global wallet and get away with whatever you want to get away with if it's purely digital. It's that question of digital and physical, which is
Mm,
something you and I talk about a lot. Some people talk about phygital, which I really hate because it sounds like some
yeah.
disease. It's like,
Uh,
yeah, I've got phygital diagnosis. So I'm not, I really hate that term. But the physical versus digital is the moment we're at right now. And the result of that, when you say in 10 years, is that it probably will be more digitality. It's evolving and
has to
progressing
be.
non-stop. And we're not going to stop that. And the more that we become digital, the more that governments struggle and borders struggle.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this lately with, the debates that we have. We've seen these debates in Europe recently, and we've seen these debates in the US with the migrant crisis, as it's called in the US, with the across the southern border. But the reality is, if you go back just over 100 years, so just prior to the First World War, there was no concept of border control. There was no concept of passports. This didn't really emerge. Passports, as we think of them today, didn't really emerge until after the Second World War. So, but there was some border controls that started to come in after the First World War with some papers, identity papers, and so forth required. But for 99.9% of human history, we've been a migratory people, and there's been no such concept of border control. So, in the current environment, we're about to see a step change in terms of migration because of climate change, food scarcity, and all of those sorts of things that makes border control impossible anyway, with the volume of potential migrants that could be moving around. So you really do need to start thinking about the fact that, you need to be able to identify people, you need to be able to provide them with basic services, and increasingly they're going to be digital, and you can't guarantee that that they've always been a resident of your country, particularly if there's sort of mass migration from climate impact. It gets pretty interesting. How do you deal with 1 billion or 2 billion people that are displaced, and they're stateless effectively?
On the
um
converse of that, when you look at people who are migratory, and I get quite angry and irritated about this area because, you know, when we talk about people who are expatriates versus migrants and immigrants, those terms, particularly the latter two, I think are quite defamatory. Isn't everyone an expatriate? But we only say that's for professionals, for people who are just coming in because of wars or
I'm an immigrant. I've been an immigrant half my life. I've spent half my life moving around the world.
I've always thought
you
you
know
were sort of bucking the system, my friend. Um, but
No, I mean, I do it. I try and do it. I obviously do it legally.
what's the difference between
But
an expat and an immigrant?
I don't know. I think they're. It's. Well, I think
I just don't like the terminology.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I
Migrants,
agree. I
the
agree with
people
that
coming from
terminology.
Syria and from Yemen and other places, when you say that they're a migrant or an immigrant, it sounds defamatory to me because it says that they're lesser than thou. When you say they're
Yes.
expatriates,
Yeah.
then you're
No,
saying, oh, that
migrant is a word that is thrown out like that today. But the reality is, if we look at the economics of both the United States and the EU, this is an interesting conversation. I would not have guessed we would have got into migration today. But you have 50 countries in the world competing for digital nomads and skilled immigrants today, such as Dubai with the gold visa program. Saudi's reportedly introducing something similar. You have Portugal, Spain, Italy now offering tax-free for people that move to Italy. Thailand has a number of, where I'm based, has a number of, next generation visa structures for people to relocate here. So there are, Indonesia, etc. There's
but
lots of
when you mention
markets
those
competing for
countries,
this.
what you're saying, so there's kind of a class divide. So Dubai and Saudi and others right now are competing for the 1% high net worth individuals who have the ability to buy $1 million plus houses, etc., and property and bring all their assets into the country and get a gold visa. In fact, it's interesting because Dubai in particular has reduced the status levels over the years regularly to encourage those high net worth individuals to move, or rather not move, invest in their
Yes.
economy. Um, Whereas when we talk about migrants and immigrants, I'm talking much more about the people on the boats coming into the UK,
Right, right, right.
who are drowning or desperate. But at the same time, quite often very intelligent, professional people. There may be lawyers or doctors. And the thing that for me is the most phantasmagorical when we look at technology is that all of these people, whether they be someone falling off a boat or getting a gold status in Dubai, is they have a mobile phone, they have access to the network, they can trade and transact and become digital nomads. And the fact is that an awful lot of people, including yourself, but there's so many other stories of people who've moved and been displaced who have become millionaires and billionaires because they have entrepreneurship that's been unleashed today by the network. It's just a case of can and do people understand that opportunity, and can they leverage it if they have that access?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there is obviously different options for people, and when we talk about these programs, we have these economies trying to attract talent, but they're also trying to attract consumption. And the
Hmm.
reality is, if you look historically at people movement, it actually doesn't matter whether you're a skilled immigrant or not. You bring economic benefit to each economy you move into. So, for example, the argument over so-called illegals in the United States, the economic evidence is very clear that that those immigrants have created enormous economic value to the U.S. economy. There's evidence that without these migrants that have come into the EU over the last 20 or 30 years, that the EU's GDP would be something like 15 to 30% lower than it is today without the migration that's been enabled there. So,
So,
um,
so we're kind of moving around the houses, but we'll come back to focus shortly. But you know that I live in Poland because I live with a lady who's
yep,
Polish, who I married a few years ago, and luckily I have two little boys, and we're just outside Warsaw. And living here is just like living anywhere in the rest of the world. You live in
yeah,
Thailand a lot of the time, and the fact is because we have digital technology means I can sit here, uh, I should probably shouldn't say it, but with a VPN, which most of us use, I can watch British news and British TV
right,
series and programs. So I could just as easily be in my home in
Anywhere.
England.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when we talk about digital nomads, what we're really saying is that if you're clever enough and you have the technology savvy to understand this stuff, I could live on the moon or Mars. I could live anywhere. It doesn't really matter.
Well, you'd have
Um,
latency problems on Mars, but
hmm,
we wouldn't be
Elon
able to
Musk
have
will
this
solve it.
video. We wouldn't be able,
We
well,
have to bring in Elon Musk somewhere, don't we?
quantum tunneling, quantum and quantum entangled communication is probably a few years off. But anyway, all right.
Quantum
So let's get back
SpaceX.
to let's get back to this is what happens when you get two futurists together, of course. But let's get back to
Is the cat dead or alive?
well, Schrodinger's, yeah. But in this world of the future with AI becoming involved in payments, how does that reshape economics? How does that reshape the functional elements of the banking system as we know it? Because don't banks just become algorithms in the future, sets of algorithms?
Well, they kind of are already. But having said that, it's a, banking is very different. So I've disagreed with you quite often about the role of branch, for example, in that I think where we're moving is that
You're gonna love
the
my new book then.
well, the financial function is psychologically rather different to other functions. It's not just a transactional service. It's particularly when it's deposit based, a trust service. And that's where the difference occurs.
Yeah,
In that,
but people trust Alipay and WeChat Pay and PayPal more than they trust banks these days.
no, because what you just mentioned are transactional services. Whereas if I'm leaving $100,000 in an account and that disappears overnight and I want it back, who do I call? How do I get it back? Equally, if I want to, you know, think about $1 million inheritance and where to put it, I want to knock on a door and actually look someone in the eye and say, show me the money so that I can trust you. It really came home to me with a digital first bank in Italy, and you probably remember Roberto
Yeah,
Ferrari,
yeah,
who
yeah,
led
yeah, 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 yeah.
Banca,
Yep.
and they were opening branches as a digital bank, a digital first bank. And I said, why the hell are you opening branches? And he said, because where we have a physical presence, we have 3 times more assets deposited than where we don't. So, but then I said, so what's the point of having the physical asset? And he said, it's my investment in marketing. And that was purely the view, which is the branch exists for marketing. It's not for service or advice. It's for marketing and trust. And that goes back to this point of trust, which goes back to if have money and assets, uh, and I put them somewhere, let's say into Google Pay or something, and it goes wrong, who do I call? What's Google's phone number?
Mm.
Have you got Google's phone number?
Uh, I got Larry Page's number. No, just kidding. Uh,
I'm not Serge.
yeah,
Serge
no,
Brin.
no. I think well, he's gone like, hasn't he become like a recluse or something? I don't know.
Just a bit.
Yeah. But I mean, I get that, but I'm still going to debate that with you because all of the fastest growing financial institutions in the world today don't have branches, right? Including players like WeBank and Nubank, and I know WeBank technically has one branch, but um, if you look at it, it doesn't stop people investing their money in these organizations today. Now, granted, they're not investing big AUM, but they are getting their salaries paid into these banks and so forth. I think you can establish trust as a bank that executes on the utility of banking without needing branches. I think that argument is essentially, over, because otherwise, WeBank and Nubank would not have been successful as they are. You can argue that in the future, maybe they will need to consider branches for certain types of product activity, like wealth management and so forth. But even there, I think there's a generational shift to that behavior as well.
Well, there's
But
kind of
here's the
two.
question:
Yeah.
are you going to need to see, in 20 years' time, are you going to need to see a physical doctor to get a trusted a diagnosis you can trust? Are you going to need to be in a doctor's surgery or speak to a physical doctor? Or will AI be able to do that job as trustworthy as a human?
You don't even need to do that in 20 years. You can not see a physical doctor today and get a pretty good answer. And that I've got a number of different issues I'm facing, and I've answered them using ChatGPT and other services. So I'm not saying you have to have a physical structure, uh, except what I am saying is there's an interesting debate around physical and digital. So I actually just wrote something about this because there was an article in one of the UK media saying that the challenger banks in Britain are not challenging anymore, and talking about Tesco being shut down. Tesco Bank, this is grocery retail bank, and Barclays taking over one of the other grocery banks, supermarket
Well,
banks.
who just announced they were buying or tying up with Virgin Money? That was an
Well,
announcement.
Virgin Money's shutting down and being acquired. I can't remember exactly who's acquiring who, but the traditional banks are taking over the challenger banks. But the challenger banks that were cited in the article are all from the 1990s, based on a physical distribution model. So there was Tesco Bank, Sainsbury Bank, Virgin
So
Money,
yeah, Nationwide is
Metro
acquiring
Bank,
Virgin Money. Yeah,
Nationwide. Yeah.
yeah.
Which is a mutual taking over one of the 1990s challenger banks. They weren't challenger banks because their model was based around
Right.
physicality. And then we've got Monzo and Revolut and Starling and N26 and Chime and at Nubank. And they're all digital platform banks. And the difference
Right.
is because of cloud, going back to what you were saying earlier, and platforms and ecosystems. And so it's the physical banks that were challenging 30 years ago that are disappearing, and it's the digital banks that are exploding. Um,
But
are
you
they
also have
but
you
are they
also
are they challenging the JP Morgan Chases or the Emirates banks of this world?
well or Commercial Bank of Dubai, Well, here's my position on that. There is plenty of consolidation going on in the banking sector. We just talked about Banker, which was acquired and wrapped up. But in the United States, we've essentially halved the number of banks, that exist there in the space of, the last 40 years or so. There's consolidation happening in the UK markets. And it is clear that the new challengers that you just mentioned are taking market share from the majors in the UK market. It's not necessarily happening in the US yet, but I would argue that's a regulatory posture thing rather than a market thing. Because look at Nubank as an example. Nubank is the largest bank in Latin America by number of customers, right? By a long margin now. It's not even close. The second largest bank, which is Itaú, has what, 55, 60 million customers. Nubank has 90 million, right? And the fact that they've acquired those in such a short time signals a very different approach to acquisition of customer assets, acquisition of deposits.
But there's
They're
two or three things about Nubank. One is appealing to people who didn't have access to banking. And the
right.
second is a little bit like Monzo in the UK, being a cool bank. And the third is their interest rate structure is decimating the traditional players because
and
they're
they're better at managing credit risk and a bunch of
exactly.
other things. Their acquisition costs are much cheaper, but
But
this is
is that
reshape
due to technology or is that due to the leadership?
both, right? I would say that they've got very good referral mechanics, but I mean, Revolut, I think, does it harder, and
Mm.
they pay more for acquisition than Nubank does, as an example, because their referral rates aren't as strong, probably, arguably, but at the same time, you can't argue anymore that you need branches for deposit taking. In fact, the Reserve Bank of India just came out with a report recently, a couple of years ago now, end of 2022, early 2023, that said if you invest $1 million in a branch in India, or you invest $1 million in digital deposit acquisition, you'll be 300 times more effective on digital than you would with a branch. And
So
that's in
what's your
the
vision of the main
single,
what's your vision of the main street in 10 years?
well, I mean, functionally, you just don't need to go to a branch anymore. And I mean, you
Yeah, but
may have,
if I walk down the main street of New York or
right, there's still
Riyadh or
branches
whatever,
everywhere there. Yeah.
hmm?
There's still empty branches all over New York,
No,
right?
in 10 years,
Oh, I think you, no, I think there'll
will there
still
be
be.
anyone on Main Street?
I think there'll still be, but I think there'll be half what it is today
Is
in
it just
terms of the
restaurants and
numbers.
coffee bars?
Well, this is a really good question. Look at the whole commercial real estate question now with working
Yeah.
from home as a trend and things like that. There's a strong argument that
Will there
we
be offices? Will people be going into New York
there's
to
going to be
work?
there's going to be multi-use locations that have co-working spaces that have dedicated offices. Some brands will continue to bring people together in the workplace, but I think there's a lot of companies today. A lot of the new companies that are starting up are all virtual in terms of their operation, which says that you're not going to have as much reliance on commercial property. So you're going to have neighborhoods become mixed use, which is, you're not going to have just commercial properties anymore. You're going to have residential mix, co-working spaces, some dedicated commercial
So
spaces there.
here's my vision of the Main Street in
Yeah.
2034, which is I'll walk down the road and there'll be lots of restaurants and coffee bars and places to network. There will still be multi-use locations as offices, but much smaller. We won't necessarily need so many sort of skyscrapers, and the
Yeah.
skyscrapers will have been turned into residential properties because the
Right.
population is
Agree.
exploding. So we need places for people to live, but there will still be a bank branch. And do you know the reason why? And I know you'll disagree with me.
Yeah.
The reason why is because show me the money. Somewhere I can go and I can look someone in the eyes and say, I can trust you to look after my money.
You're such a boomer, Chris.
Okay, boomer.
Okay, boomer. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think I think that's generational thinking. I think our kids are not going to think like that. I don't think
So do
they'll
you
have,
think kids will be
yeah.
happy with never ever seeing any physical form of finance?
Yeah. Like just as happy as they are of not
Because
having to
I,
tune into a
I
TV
remember
at
you
a certain
presenting the
time to
story about
watch their favorite show.
no, but I remember you presenting the story about the check and saying, "What the hell? You put a check in the post and it takes 3
It
days."
was
And
my daughter. Yes, I told that
yeah, yeah,
story
yeah.
about my daughter
So
when she was
I can
10.
accept that, but what I don't accept, and maybe it is generational thinking, is the idea that if I lose, you know, $1 million on Mount Gox, which I did, that there's no way to get it back digitally or physically, and I need to take someone to court, I need to sue someone, and will the law
But
and the
I think
courtroom
those,
become digital,
yeah,
purely
but
digital?
I think those problems have to be solved, right? Those problems have to be solved, and AI is obviously the way to solve them, right? When you can talk with an AI agent that can act on your behalf, that is as good as or better than a human, then I think you can get the same resolution of those sorts of issues as you would today by seeing a human. What you're arguing for is you've got a person of last resort that you can go and meet with if things go
Okay,
wrong or
so
things go
we've got a
bad.
few minutes left. What job will be left for a human if AI solves everything?
I mean, I've talked about this in my books repeatedly, and the
Yeah,
answer to
and in
that
mine.
is, and the answer is, you'll be able to do something far more meaningful as a human than just a job that puts food on the table and a roof over your head. You'll be able to, even just with the UBI trials that we've seen globally, um, the uh, uh, the 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 people involved in those trials start their own businesses at three times the higher rate of the 3 times the rate of the general population, and they get involved in community-based activities 75% higher rate than the general population. So that's what people do when they don't have to work to put food on the table. They do jobs that they think are more meaningful, that can add more to society.
So you're saying it's a
And I,
future where people don't need to work.
well, AI's intent has always been to remove humans from the workforce. That's ultimately what the market's position on
So you're
artificial
saying
intelligence is.
AI means that people don't have to work, and the
They
state
don't
has
have
to
to do
the state has to give
robotic.
them the income to survive.
Yes. Well, but that's the only way you can keep the capitalist system going. If the AI is going
This
to
is your
create immense wealth.
techno-socialism, isn't it?
Well,
Uh,
this is the debate, right?
uh,
This is
uh,
the
uh,
debate.
Are you a bit extreme? A bit left of center?
No, no, come on. Let's get into the conversation. And we're going to extend this chat because we can't just finish this on a cliffhanger like this. But um let me give you my argument, and I think you'll come around eventually to this for various obvious reasons. But the market is pushing AI. That much is clear, and we know that if AI is successful at creating the level of productivity and automation that we expect it will do, that it's going to fundamentally change the relationship of supply and demand to two elements, capital and labor, right? Because the most productive corporation you can have is one that doesn't need humans, right? And the market's going to love that, right? But if you want to keep the capitalist system going, you need people buying their Apple Vision Pros and their widgets and things like that. You need consumption. So how do you keep consumption going in an environment where you can't work and get paid? You have to pay something like a universal basic income. And that presumably is paid for by the immense wealth that's created by artificial intelligence. But ultimately, what you realize when you go down that thought exercise is that if AI is successful, ultimately the capitalist system that we have can't survive because wealth distribution won't occur efficiently. And you create two macro classes, the asset owners, the AI owners, and those on basic income that can't be involved in that asset ownership. And that's a problem that requires us redesigning or rethinking the role of money in society. So let me throw that back at you.
Right.
You're talking about CBDCs and cryptocurrencies and things like that, but what what is the fundamental change of how money works in our society in
Well,
the future?
well, they've tried universal basic income experiments in Finland and Norway and a lot of the Nordic countries, and it doesn't work because people just some function and some become dysfunctional. I would say, you can only provide
But I
a
just gave you
universal.
some evidence that that's not the case, right? And that comes from those same studies. Like
The
the argument that
Yeah, but
people all become couch potatoes.
we can argue the toss. The idea of universal basic income is interesting, but you will only get that by taxing the capitalist system of AI dominators.
Okay, so
And
the only alternative is you have to ban artificial intelligence from taking human
no,
jobs.
no,
That's
no,
the
no, no. You just need to recognize there are different new jobs. Who is creating artificial intelligence? Who is training it? Who is maintaining it? How do you make sure it works properly? How do you make sure it's not abusing the human, for example? You have to have regulation of AI, which at the moment is, very embryonic. It's such early days, and the end of days, not literally, but we're going to see people, in my view, becoming uh, much more um, relationship focused, and that changes the whole school system. It changes the whole financial system.
Mm. No, I do think that we are going to emphasize the human experience because that's the way we will differentiate from machines. And there is opportunities for humans to carve out new roles in that. But I just think that um, anything that's process driven, anything that's repetitive in nature, initially, if it's if it can be automated, it will. So
Yeah, yeah.
factory workers, all of that sort of stuff, and the argument
Software is
from
eating the world.
right, and the argument from capitalists is that in every new, every technological advancement we've had, like the industrial age, like
So,
computing, that like the internet, that we do destroy jobs, but with the net, on a net basis, we create new jobs. But we've
so you
never had a
accuse me of being
technology.
a okay boomer. So I can also add to that that I'm a Luddite.
No, I
And
don't think you're a
and the
Luddite
Luddites,
necessarily.
the Luddites were right. It's been proven
Yeah.
by other research. The Luddites got it right. Destroy some of these technological innovations because it's not doing the right thing. It's centralizing power and ownership, and that's my biggest worry about
Okay. So we
where
come
we're
back
going
to the
with AI.
decentralization thing. Well, yes, this is, this is part of the debate. Part of the
Yeah,
debate is, what are the value systems that this creates for us in this environment? And the argument for decentralization, I think that's clear, but and maybe it's going to take rapid change where AI is deployed and rapid technology based unemployment for people to say, all right, this function of the market is enough. And not just because of AI's disruption, but climate as well. So what are the values in the world that emerge out of that? And one of the strongest messages that appears to be coming is this message of anti-growth, right? That from an economics perspective, that it is that focus on GDP growth and economic growth,
mm.
which is at the heart of the problem, because that's why we committed, fossil fuels to, committed to the whole fossil fuel industry when we knew that burning hydrocarbons in the atmosphere would create health problems for pollution and things
Let's
like
not get
that.
into that because that's my last
I know.
400-page book,
Okay.
Digital for
But
Good. Just a
right.
shameless plug.
Right. No, but that's it. I mean, we need to start figuring out how do we create, systems that are regenerative, that are sustainable and that are more community based. Ultimately, I think this is the real question: is what is the economy for if it's not to provide for the basic needs of citizens? And this is something that in pure capitalist societies, I think we've lost touch with. That it's there to create, for the share price to go, for dividends to come, and for market return and growth to come. But ultimately, if the economy isn't providing a better quality of life for citizens, then I think that you've got a functional problem.
As someone said to me the other day, and I know we're wrapping up, but they said to me the other day, aren't we here to create wealth and profit, or are we here to look after community and the people? And I said,
Yeah.
well, let's just go back and check out Robin Hood. Not Robin Hood,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
the
No.
fintech, but Robin Hood, the
No.
merry
No. I
men
get it.
and
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
in the forest.
But I mean, I think part of that generational shift we're going to see is our kids saying, what did capitalism really do for us? It created
Yeah.
climate change. It created all these problems. We need a better system. So there is, I don't, and it's not necessarily that I'm not arguing necessarily for socialism or communism either. I think we need a net new system, something that we call it something different. Right. But I think we are coming to the natural conclusion of
I think we need to
the,
need to get to an equilateral system, and by that I mean everyone is equal, everyone's included, and it's very much the vision that Gene Roddenberry had in Star Trek, who I'm a huge fan of. And his vision of the future was money doesn't exist, it's about reputation.
yeah, yeah. Well, of course, you can watch Black Mirror and see how the reputation economy could play out as well. But so tell us, Chris, just to wrap up, tell people about your new book and when it comes out and where they can go for pre-order.
Yeah, the new book's coming out in the summer. It's called Intelligent Money. There's a website called Money Thinks for You, and the for you is the number four and the letter U. And it's all about everything we've just discussed, really, where everything is going in intelligence built in to the financial system, generative finance, AI, and transactions.
And will you have a relationship with your AI-based wallet in the future?
I already do. It tells me that I have to go and buy my wife some jewelry.
Very good.
And
Chris Skinner, it's been,
you know where that's coming from, because
of
you do know
course.
my wife.
Yes, yes, of course. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you back on the show, and certainly a very interesting conversation. It didn't go any way the way I thought it would. Actually, I didn't think we would be getting into this debate, so that's a nice surprise. So, and how do people follow up on what you're doing generally? I know we've got the book URL moneythinksforyou.com, intelligent money, but how do people follow you, Chris Skinner? What's the
Well, you
easiest
know that
way?
I blog every day at thefinanser.com, and equally Chris_Skinner at X. Equally, you can find me pretty easily. Just pop my name into any Google machine. Hopefully I'll come up first.
Awesome. Well, Chris Skinner, thanks for joining us on the show, and stay well, brother.
Thanks, Brent.
That's it for the show this week. Thanks for joining us. Great to have a detailed conversation with Chris. We don't get to do this very often. We should do it more often. But be sure to check out his new book, Intelligent Money, and get involved in this debate. Tell us what you think. Do you think UBI is going to work? Do you think not? How would we salvage something from this in highly autonomous societies where AI is pushed by the market? Tell us what you think on social media, and share your thoughts with us. We'd love to have that. But that's it for this week. We'll see you again next week with more Breaking Banks.
This show is brought to you by Alloy Labs. As much as we love talking on the show, we believe that action is more valuable than talk. Alloy Labs is the industry leader in helping fearless bankers drive exponential growth through collaboration, exclusive partnerships, and powerful network effects that give them an unfair advantage. Learn more at alloylabs.com. Alloy Labs, banking unbound.
That's it for this week. If you like the show, make sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, or share it with a friend, or share it on social media.
We'll see you again next week with more Breaking Banks.